Legislative Caucus Institute. We, as you know, we have banded together to make sure that there's a pipeline of Asian Pacific Islanders who want to run for public office. Racially motivated attacks against Asian Pacific Islanders have surged during COVID. But I'm an old gal and it's been around for a long time. And this is what I say to you: speak up. We're going to speak up. We're speaking out and we're doing something. So thank you for being here today. I want to put you in the wonderful hands of our phenomenal Assemblymember, Evan Lowe. Evan, take it from here.
Thank you very much, Mona, and good to see all of you. Annie, thanks so much also for your work in convening, especially as we recognize the important contributions of dynamic women in the state of California during Asian Pacific Islander recognition of some of our strong AAPI women in Women's History Month. So again, an opportunity to highlight some of our dynamic AAPI women. My name is Evan Lowe, and I have the honor of serving as Vice Chair of the California Legislative Asian Pacific Islander Caucus. And we are making history with the record number of Asian Pacific Islanders in our caucus, but we lack some women. We lack that type of representation. So again, I think it's important that we recognize in this month of Women's History Month, the importance of us to be as proactive as possible and intentional about ensuring that we recognize the contributions of all of us. So assembled here today are some dynamic leaders throughout the entire state. I've seen them in action. I've read about them, especially each and every day when we check all the news clips about what's going on and who's doing what and trading notes. So I'll ask them to give a little bit of a brief introduction, self-introductions, name, affiliation, and just something about yourself so we can get right into the conversation. So let's begin with my dear friend to the East Bay, our Council Pro Tem, Sheng Thao.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Lowe. I think this is our first panel together. It's such an honor to be here, and thank you so much, Mona, for your great leadership. My name is Sheng Thao. I'm Council President Pro Tem in the city of Oakland, the beautiful city of Oakland. I represent District 4, which is mainly the Oakland Hills and some in the flats as well. I'm also the API League of Cities Caucus President as well. And so that's elected officials throughout the state of California. That's a caucus, the API caucus for elected officials throughout the state of California. I'm also the first Hmong woman to be elected in the state of California to city council and to hold that seat. And so that's something I'm very proud of. I'm also a single mom, a DV survivor, and I represent working families. It's the core to my bone. I'm a daughter of refugees, and it's what I represent and bring that voice to the table. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's our first official time, but I think last time we were breaking bread and eating in your beautiful city. So
yes,
we'll have to get back to that. Next up, let's go down in Southern California in Orange County. Mayor Khan.
Hi, thank you so much, Assemblymember Lowe, and it's such an honor to be here today. Just wanted to share that I am the mayor for the city of Irvine in Orange County. Was elected as the first API woman for our city, and now currently am elected as the first API woman mayor for our city. And for our city, which is just a little under 300,000 people, we do have about 45% of our population that identify as Asian. And so it's really important for me to be here and not only to talk about some of the issues that we're facing, but also be that voice that is going to find solutions as we move forward. So great to be here.
Great, thank you very much. And next up, Shaosan Liu.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shaosan Liu. I'm the executive director of the Chinese Progressive Association in San Francisco, and it's absolutely my honor to be part of this amazing lineup of powerful Asian women today, and especially on a day when I think many of us are feeling a lot of grief for what's happened in Atlanta. And I want to share briefly that Chinese Progressive Association, we're a community organization based in San Francisco, and for almost 50 years now, we have provided direct services, education, and really worked to build the political voice of working class Chinese immigrant community members. And that looks like, supporting restaurant workers in overcoming their fears to win back stolen wages. It looks like supporting a mom living in a single room occupancy hotel to learn how to advocate for affordable housing. It looks like like supporting young people to, just in the last couple of years, they waged a campaign in San Francisco to get funding for mental health services to meet the unmet needs of Asian and other young people of color in public schools. So that's a little bit about the work that we do. And we also really are guided by principles of multiracial solidarity and collaboration.
Well, thank you very much. And we have one other dynamic woman joining us, but she's currently testifying in the committee, and that's just the way it works with the busy schedules too. So let's get just maybe our first question that I think, feel free to just chime in as you see fit to, but what is it about just the Asian Pacific Islander community? Why do we not have more women in the California state legislature? Whomever wishes to respond, and or how might you be able to address some of the barriers that might, exist, and what we can do to change that?
I think I could start off. And so the question around why do we feel as if there's not API women in the state legislature, I think that there's an institutional aspect to it in regards to what API women, what kind of leadership they represent. There's this, model minority, but not just that, but, these, stereotypes of the type of people that we are, whether we won't speak out, we're very shy and quiet and what have you. And so that's not traits of a leader and all of these other things that come with it in the bag. And so that's very institutional. And I think also because API women are seen as more domesticated in arenas or what have you, that again doesn't allow for our leadership to expand. And so when I talk about institution, it's also within communities and institution around financial backing. We all know that in any sort of campaigns or races or what have you, you need the financial backing to be a viable candidate. And that's where it becomes really tough, is that even within our own API community, I think that we need to do a better job at uplifting our API women voices, because we do not see, there's a huge difference between the type of support that API men receive relative to their API women counterparts. It's not the question of whether there's any API women who are willing to step up and lead. There's plenty of us who are willing to step up and lead. It's just who is there to support us and to believe in our leadership to kind of move the dial in that conversation. And so that's kind of like the brief answer, but I think that is a big aspect and a big hurdle in regards to how we can actually support more API women to run for state legislature.
Well, this is about having real talk too, but I've had a conversation with you too. If you don't mind putting you on the spot, I've had a conversation with you about making sure that we can help look at your upward trajectory and making the fact known that we lack Asian Pacific Islander women, and that the pedigree and the pipeline is so important. And the conversation that you and I have had has been such that some of the similar type of things that we've heard. Well, you said in response when I've said, what about you for the state legislature? You said, well, I don't know if I'm ready. I need to take more time. And I feel like for men, speaking for myself, we're like, yes. In fact, when I was 21, I said, I'm going to run for a city council, no problem. And I feel like my experience has been such that when I talk to women, for example, though, it takes multiple times for us to have those conversations, flush that out, and talk about these balancing issues too. Is there something there to which we can say, let's recognize and be real about the distinction between men and women, and how do we overcome some of those barriers for an ally to help say we want to support API women?
Absolutely. And, when people ask me about, I would love to see you in this seat or what have you. And Evan, you have been such a great ally and really supportive in that regard. And I think that if we had more of that allyship and support from the API men community to really uplift, to help uplift us, because a lot of it is, you look at your trajectory and when you run a campaign, you run it to win, not to see how I do. Right. And so if you don't feel like there's actual support from the institution, or if you see that, the fundraising aspect is done differently, like say, for instance, you fundraise for API men a lot, you get a certain amount of dollars for API men relative to women, that's going to be deterrent as to who's going to be able to be there to support me and have my back. And so I think that in that regard, I think within the API community and beyond, I think there needs to be a full, 360 support in regards to how API women lead and encourage API women to run. but I appreciate your support, continuous support, Assemblymember Lowe.
Well, let me just have a straight talk. There are some other seats in which there are multiple men in a numbering seat, Asian Pacific men. They're plentiful. It's an embarrassment of riches. And every time we find qualified Asian Pacific women, it's not an embarrassment of riches. It's rather we work so hard to try to recruit and get them to step up to the plate. And so again, I just want us to have a real conversation about that to see what we can do to help create the structures in place to help support a welcoming environment for everyone as well too. Transitioning then to Shaw-san, I see that you're also doing a balancing act with family too. Is that also a challenge and a barrier that you might see given the work in terms of advocacy and activism and making sure that we advocate for the benefit of public policy that works for our communities?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Lowe, for that question. I feel, I think all of us parenting in the pandemic are finding our challenges, and I think the data and our own personal experiences show the brunt of the burden is still carried by women, or by the birthing parents often, right, in a household. And I think that I think it's really interesting we raise the issue of gender and it's Women's History and Futures Month at a time when we have seen these devastating attacks in Georgia on women, targeting an industry that is where it's mostly low-wage immigrant workers, Asian immigrant workers in personal services, massage, spa industries. And I think that the topic of today around anti-Asian hate really just rings so very strongly, and I see so many of our allies led by women often, right? These organizations have been coming together to really talk about, what is the meaning of what's happened in Georgia for our understanding of, the shapes of the dimensions that anti-Asian hate take on, that there is a gendered violence. Gender violence is very much part of what our community has faced for a long time, and is being surfaced in the shootings in Georgia, as well as the intersection of economics, the fact that these are low-wage workers in going to work every day, risking their lives, to put food on the table, who were targeted in this shooting. And I think just really highlights the intersection of the issues that we see right now between racism, between economic inequality, and around gender.
And then transitioning, you referenced the work that you're doing right now too. Can you tell us a little bit about the Chinese Progressive Association and the work that you're doing and what we can help do to help support some of that too, specifically around anti-Asian hate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for the question. So Chinese Progressive Association, we work on a lot of different issues. Our base is primarily working families, low-wage workers, tenants, young people. And I think we really see that the issues of anti-Asian hate and violence, they're complex, right? Because not every act of violence against an Asian person is hate motivated or is a hate crime. But we're seeing a surge in those incidents and in the visibility of those incidents. And there's a lot of fear that our community is facing, because even pre-pandemic, our communities were often feeling very economically insecure, having hard time getting affordable housing, right? Not accessing the healthcare that they needed. Add on the pandemic with the increase in anti-Asian and xenophobic targeting that led to really a heavy impact on our Chinatown businesses, on the industries that our families work in. And then these highly visible acts of violence against our elders that have happened in the Bay Area have been really created a deep sense of insecurity and fear among our community members. So the work that we've been doing really has been around reimagining what does it take to keep our community safe? What does it take for us to actually have security for our elders, for our workers, for our young people? We're part of a coalition called the Community Coalition for Safety and Justice. And we really saw that there was a lack of services that were appropriate in language, culturally responsive, and actually tailored to the safety concerns of the Asian immigrant community in San Francisco, which is 35% Asian. And there was a lack of city infrastructure, prevention, victim support services. Many things were not in place, which meant that local community organizations were taking up the work, but not having always the proper training or resources to do so. So we have started a program through the Community Coalition for Safety and Justice that's in 3 basic areas. The first area is around comprehensive, culturally responsive victim support services. The second area is around really building the community infrastructure between organizations as well as public agencies to do the prevention, education, intervention that's needed to keep our community safe. And then the third area is around cross-racial healing and dialogue, and really recognizing that there is a lot of racial tension that exists in our communities, and there's a lot of obviously, to say the least, and that there needs to be education and there needs to be space for our communities to actually come together and heal and learn from each other's experiences. Because the reality is that communities of color across the Bay Area and across San Francisco don't feel safe. And it's not just Asian communities who feel unsafe and who feel targeted by violence. So we need to be able to come together, because the only way to solve these issues is to recognize they have a shared systemic and structural causes, and that we need to come together to work for solutions.
That's great. So again, 3 key pillars: cultural, responsive support network, and the community infrastructure, not only with the community-based organizations, but also with the city and local government as well. And then thirdly, cross-racial healing and that type of dialogue that exists. So those 3 key pillars, helpful to know, because I think so many of us are saying, what can be done? We just feel so vulnerable and helpless, but thank you for providing some key 3 areas to which we can advocate for and actually demand from wherever we are in respective communities.
Absolutely. And Assemblymember Lowe, if I could just add one point, is that this is really coming out of looking at what are the various ways we can increase safety in our communities, and understand that there have been some very ineffective approaches, right, towards trying to achieve safety. And a lot of times, some of the automatic response is to say, let's have more police, or let's, have more punitive responses. And we've really seen, through our communities, that those solutions have actually harmed communities of color often more than they have helped. And we need to have a broader range of tools and appropriate interventions to help our communities be safer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Then transitioning to Mayor Khan, specifically within the city that you represent at the helm, and we're so fortunate to have you at the helm. What's the status of hate crimes against Asian Pacific Islander Americans in your community?
We've seen them increase so much, not only in the city of Irvine, but also when we look at Orange County, which has one of the larger API populations. We've seen it between 2019 and 2020 increase by tenfold. And, some of the things that we're seeing, which are unlike what's happening in Northern California, as in Southern California, we're seeing a lot of these hate incidents where the perpetrator is usually a Caucasian male. And so not only that, but we're seeing an increase in youth activity as well, which really needs to stop. I don't know if you guys have heard or not, but in Ladera Ranch, we had a family that was targeted by youth that were really just harassing them night after night. And it took neighbors to come out and, be on a watch dog sort of situation where they were sitting outside their home overnight to protect the family. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think for us, especially in Irvine, we've seen our Chinese school and cultural center get vandalized. We had one of our residents that was out shopping and asked a white male to put on a mask, and he in turn followed her to her car and almost assaulted her. And what's worse is when you look on social media, the responses are really just incredible. It's, maybe he was having a bad day. He was frustrated because of all the things that are happening during lockdown. And yes, people can get frustrated, people can get angry, but that does not allow them to be racist. And really, that's where the conversation needs to be is, what is acceptable in racism, and any sort of assault, whether it's, turns into a crime or just an incident, is just not acceptable anymore.
Well, thank you for that. And do you feel like that is taking up a great amount of your time, and that you get the support from other council members and city officials as well?
Absolutely. So one of the first things we did right now, and that we are working on right now, is making sure that we come up with solutions. And some of the problems that we saw were data related, where we had our API organizations have certain data numbers. Our Irvine PD had a very small number of reported hate incidences. And then, of course, the Human Relations Commission had a totally different number. And so we really want to bring these community organizations together so we have better data. Not only that, but are we making sure that we are providing opportunity for people to report in multiple languages, making it easier for them? Sometimes calling the police officer may not be as comfortable as we've heard. And so we're making sure that we have an online portal within the city so that people can, share their hate incident, report it online in a secure manner. So we're definitely looking at this as a way to improve our city and our services for our residents.
Well, I think that's why representation matters. It's not just about tokenism or anti-tokenism, but why you can see real meaningful change by having Asian Pacific Islanders in these positions to help effectuate change. Thank you for that perspective. Manju, you've been very, very busy. I know that you're running around, and especially in the current climate, you're jumping into different meetings. So we're honored to have you. We're just going to go to a quick self-introduction by yourself, but asking this question to you as well. Stop AAPI Hate Center has done a tremendous job in making sure that we collect the data specifically around these incidences and offering resources specifically also to those who have been victimized. Can you share with us an update on the collected data, and if there might be any trends that you are seeing that would be helpful for us to know?
Sure. And apologies for being late. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Lowe. And it's a real honor to be with you all today and part of this esteemed panel. Unfortunately, we are seeing a number of trends through our Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center. Just for background, I wanted to let folks know we started it almost exactly a year ago on March 19th of 2020 because Chinese for Affirmative Action, San Francisco State University, and APCON began to see what was sadly an emerging trend of COVID-19 related incidents against our Asian American Pacific Islander community members. And so we began to track it, and within a few weeks, we got essentially several hundred incident reports, and those have continued since that time. And as of February 28th, we've received almost 3,800 incident reports from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. That includes 1,600 from California itself. And here in Southern California, I can tell you we've had even 360. And I know the number in the Bay Area is even larger. So what we've seen from our data is that it includes verbal harassment, as well as discrimination in the workplace, in housing, as well as in restaurants, grocery stores, pharmacies. And in some cases, it also does involve physical assaults. And we know there have been a number of those in the Bay Area. And then, of course, also threats of assault in other parts, including Orange County. And so, what we're trying to do in addition to serving as a reporting center is also to provide resources, which are on our website. One such resource is a 50-state survey of what the laws are around discrimination in public accommodations. So those are businesses like retail, restaurants, grocery stores, and then the complaint processes. So you can essentially click on a link and it'll take you to California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing. You can click on links for other states as well. We are also trying to provide direct assistance wherever possible. And finally, policy. As the mayor said, it's so important that we have solutions to what's happening now and begin, that conversation, which I think, we're so heartened by what President Biden did in his first week of office. We need to now urge action to follow those statements, as well as statements from our governor, as well as our local and state leaders.
Thank you very much. The data collection is so critical, but as you well know, this is also about the reporting that actually is done. So much of what we see in our communities is underreported. How do we help tackle that? Because the data that you provided is stark and troubling. But we all know too that there's so much underreporting that goes on. Are there opportunities that you've seen for us to work collaboratively to help ensure that we create an environment where can there be more comfort level on reporting?
Absolutely. And thank you for raising this important point. We know that there's been significant underreporting. 3,800 incidents may seem like a lot, but I will tell you the Pew Research Center has found that 3 out of 10 Asian Americans in the United States have experienced some sort of harassment, whether it be racial slurs, racist remarks. If our population is 24 million strong, then that means roughly 8 million or so have experienced something in their daily lives. So that's truly disheartening and horrifying. And so it makes reporting even more important. What we've tried to do at Stop AAPI Hate is provide an online reporting vehicle. It's available in several Asian languages. So that way people, who are not English proficient, right? So many in our community speak English as a second language. So they are not barred in any way or prevented from completing our forms. And then we know that there are programs, in different parts of our state that also use language lines and other things. What's most important is that we get this data so we understand what's going on, because without it, what we have, unfortunately, is, solitary news reports or social media pieces. And we really need to understand what's going on in America today, because, we not only need to address it, but we need to prevent it going forward.
Thank you very much. We've heard specifically what's happening in the city of Irvine. You heard about what's going on in the nation, and also community-based organizations doing the arduous work and task of getting the data collection. Oftentimes it's difficult for public jurisdiction to do so. Councilmember Thao, what's going on in Oakland with respect to these hate crimes and what the city is doing to help tackle these issues?
Absolutely. In Oakland, as we have seen, I think the whole nation has now seen, there has been an uptick in anti-Asian violence. A lot of the communities that is actually being targeted is our seniors, our elders who are walking in Chinatown. Chinatown, we have seen an uptick, right, in regards to, even with the pandemic and COVID, a lot of the small businesses have shuttered or closed or temporarily closed. But with this added factor, right, word and language means a lot. And I just have to put it out there. Trump really drove out and really just gave space to people to actually have this anti-Asian hate, right? Through his rhetoric of what happened with the coronavirus, or, calling it the Kung flu or what have you. That's just the reality of it. And it's emboldened people or given false, factors in regards to why APIs should be targeted. And I see that is happening in the community, but this is a systemic issue. And I think that a lot of times people would try to, or even local governments or communities would try to divide our groups, right? Divide a lot of the minority groups and say that it's either one or the other. And it's not the case at all. We need to come together in space to help each other heal. And I think that our, response to that kind of tactic is that, in the city of Oakland, we held spaces where it's been, Asian and Black love. Basically, right? Asian and Black folks and brown bodies coming together, showing up for each other. When we talk about how do we actually work through and get connected with other groups and other people and communities and organizations, this is it was such a beautiful healing process when we held, the vigil around anti-hate against Asian Americans and Asian people in general. And so, we had the Black community show, we had the Brown community show, we had everybody show up to show support. And I think that that's what's needed as we go through this healing process. You know, it's very traumatic events that are happening within our communities. And it's easy to say, you know, a general group of people is to blame, but it's not. That's not the case. You know, there are systemic issues that come into play. And, you know, a lot of those systemic issues can be addressed as time goes on through policies and what have you. But in the immediacy, and I want to, you know, thank you for uplifting that the API community culturally, you know, it's keep your head down and, you know, let's not stir things up or what have you. But this has been like a historical struggle, right? This whole xenophobic feeling, the feeling of like otherness, the feeling of, you know, not belonging has been going on for generations. And I think that it is extremely timely that we uplift the API voice around some of the struggles that we go through, because we're not the loudest voices. We're not, you know, we don't report things that happen to us or what have you. We try to keep our head down, but this is so egregious in a way where there is no, please come and speak out, and we have your back. I think that that's a part of it too, because for me, even as an elected leader, you know, if without the support of folks like you all, you know, it's a very scary space to come out and speak your truth. And I want to just tell people that if you're experiencing some racial hate, speak your truth, because we've got your back. You know, speak your truth. Don't be afraid. You know, there's a lot of people out there who, and a lot of organizations who can support you. And Oakland is very diverse. But this, I just want to make sure that we acknowledge that, you know, by us working together with other ethnic groups, we are stronger together. And this whole thought of trying to divide us, that's nonsense, because we are all trying to get to liberation and to dismantle, you know, racism within each and every single one of our communities. And if we stick together, then we are stronger together.
Yeah, well said. Are there some specific models that you're looking at in the city of Oakland that you might be able to share that are based on best practices?
Yes, you know, in the city of Oakland, we have a lot of community organizations that do a lot of great work on the ground. And I think this is the point. The key point is we need to have work with community organization. Politicians must work with their communities and listen to the lead of the community, right? We as politicians, you know, yes, we write the policies and the laws and what have you, but there are a lot of times where we need to allow for the community to lead and we need to follow. And this is an instance. You know, we need to follow the lead of the community in regards to how the community heals, in regards to how the community can protect themselves and not actually over police Black and brown bodies. And this is, you know, and I'm seeing that as an example when we're holding space together. When elected officials here in the city of Oakland, we have come out, you know, as API elected officials and Black elected officials to come together and say, we do not stand for this. And we're calling it out for what it is. We're not saying people of color. We are saying stop hate against APIs. Just call it what it is. We need to call it out what it is. It's not people of color in this instance. Let's say stop the hate against APIs, just like how we stand shoulder to shoulder with our Black and brown brothers and say Black Lives Matter. Right? It's the same thing. We got to call it out. And we're seeing that work being done in our communities in the city of Oakland. And I think that that's how we actually heal together. And like I said, I'm going to reiterate it. Politicians, we need to take a back seat on this one, and we have to follow the community's lead.
Sheng, Councilwoman Thao used words like divide and the dangers of pitting communities against each other. And oftentimes our community afraid of speaking truth. Of course, we can look at the solidarity and allyship of other communities as well. How is the Chinese Progressive Association working to bridge the community specifically with the Asian Pacific community and our Black and brothers and sisters?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you and ditto to the Councilwoman's powerful statement just now. And Ely Kai has something to say too. I think she really doesn't like communities being pitted against each other. That's what's going on here. And so I want to start by saying what some of the problem is, why the tension exists. I think some of the reasons why they exist, to talk about then what is our solution to that, right? Can't really solve a problem we don't understand. And I think that the reality is racial tensions are real and they exist. If we're speaking, between different communities of color, they exist. And specifically in San Francisco, local context, Chinese and Black communities, there is tension and there's been tension for many years. And I think my understanding of it is that these tensions are really a result of our communities not having the resources and the opportunities they need to live well, to live with dignity and respect. And because of the ways that white supremacy and racism in this country have shaped our views of each other and have dehumanized and scapegoated each other rather than understand our shared humanity, understand our shared goals, and understand our shared futures. We're racialized in different ways. Our communities feel very much that they have experienced physical violence and often, burglaries or muggings and those kinds of attacks. And not always, but oftentimes it has been, perpetrators from other communities of color, including the Black community, where the Black community, has been decimated in San Francisco. It's down to 4%. And they've been displaced so many times within their own city. And the last foothold for Black communities in San Francisco is a neighborhood now where there's a lot of Chinese community families moving in. And I will add, foreign investors from China, right? Like buying up property. So there's a lot of complicated dynamics. We hear from some of our Latinx allies that, they refer to the landlord as El Chino, like the Chinese person, because a lot of their landlords who are sometimes not treating them very well are Chinese. So there's just so many places where people's daily hardships can translate into, blame and division, right? So, for us, we believe that the solution to all of this, to racial inequity, to economic inequality, is solidarity and, pushing together for the investments we need in our communities. And that's why for CPA, multiracial alliance building has always been core to our work and a key, there's nothing significant that we can win to improve the lives of Chinese people in San Francisco without doing it in collaboration with other communities of color and also other sectors like labor unions. And we've been, really deliberate about doing that work. So I think that it's important that it both exists at the level of advocacy and fighting together. And, we've had giant lobby visits where we have 50 people in City Hall of all different races, learning about each other's issues and coming together to speak out as one voice. Sorry. Okay.
I think that's a ditto.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I just want to name is that it has to go beyond just a coming together for a rally or vigil, which is important, and we need to have those spaces. It's important for us to have those spaces like rallies and vigils and press events to speak out and show our solidarity, but it must go beyond that. And I think for us, one strategy we found to be very important is, as we advocate together for policies that will uplift all of our communities, that we actually build the people-to-people relationship. And that's like having conversations where a Chinese mom who lives in a single room occupancy hotel can sit across the table from a young Black teenager, right, who lives in the Bayview, for them to be able to actually have a conversation that will never happen in real life unless there are grassroots organizations with that commitment and intention to hold that kind of space for interpreting, but not just interpreting, but really holding the intentionality of that conversation. And we've seen how powerful it can be for people to hear each other's stories and to understand and to look beyond the headlines and the stereotypes that they hear every day, to really humanize each other and understand each other's histories and be able to see what our shared interests could be moving forward together.
Well, I think that's great. And that actually was a great way to segue and transition into some of our questions and answers. And building off of the comments that you said, again, you used the phrase multiracial collaboration specifically. And one of our questions specifically that we've received is, how do we collaborate with Black organizations while also holding Black individuals accountable for the acts of violence against members of our community?
I think there's no I don't think there's anything contradictory about holding any individual accountable for the harms they've committed and working with other communities. And I think even the question is a bit conflating because, you know, we could have the same question come from a non-Asian ally saying, how do we work in partnership with Asian organizations and be in solidarity while also holding, you know, these Chinese landlords accountable, or while also holding these Chinese investors who are, you know, gentrifying my community accountable? Like, we don't hold the responsibility for those actions of those individuals as a community, right? We need to understand what are the systems and structures behind those harms. And so I think they're not mutually exclusive in any way.
Wonderful. Yes, please.
Could I add, you know, I think we've been doing this for a number of years. So, I mean, I also want to just highlight, you know, the work that CPA, CAA, and others in the Bay Area. I mean, there's so many that have been doing that important work over decades. And similarly for us in Los Angeles, APCON was one of the organizations that brought together Korean American business owners with African American communities after the uprising, because we knew how important that was. And really to also, you know, point out what Shah-San said, which is around the structural racism that we are all under, right? And so being able to name that and assign responsibility and accountability there too, right? What are decision makers, policymakers doing that sometimes does end up pitting us against each other by their very policies? So I think we need to sort of open up that conversation beyond individual perpetrators of violence. And, you know, let me just say one other thing I didn't raise earlier. When we look at our data, the vast majority, 90% or more, are hate incidents and not hate crimes. So I want us to be really mindful of that in how we think of solutions moving forward, because law enforcement is not the sole answer. We know that. I think many of our communities have known that for decades, but it's really clear by our data that we need comprehensive solutions that help to build civil rights infrastructures, providing resources to local communities that they need for safety and also for well-being, right? So I think once we really kind of expand the possibilities and look beyond like, oh, X person did something to Y person or Y to Z, then we, I think, get at the solutions our communities really need.
Well, that's great, Manju, because then this question, I think, could be directed similarly. I think you touched on it a little bit, but we have a question here about the how you might differentiate between a hate crime and other crimes. What is the best way to respond, not as a victim, but to best understand why the crimes exist?
Well, if I can say one thing first in terms of what the difference is between a hate incident and a hate crime, because I think for a lot of folks, they don't understand that. So a hate crime actually has to have an underlying criminal element, right? So when we think of crimes, these are often things that involve bodily harm. So battery, rape, homicide, you know, can in some cases be assaults also. And so we have to know that, and of course, vandalism. So property crimes are also crimes. But the vast majority, when I say the 90%, that involves verbal harassment, which is about 66%. And, you know, I think all of us today on this call or meeting value free speech. And so we don't necessarily want law enforcement or anyone else coming after our free speech rights. That doesn't mean we don't address what's happening in terms of verbal harassment, but law enforcement's not the answer. And similarly with discrimination, that discrimination I talked about earlier in the workplace, in housing, in public accommodations, those are civil violations and civil rights violations. So what we really need is a strong infrastructure to deal with those, because if you look at, again, our data, they're about in same numbers to physical assault. One other thing I want to mention, Assembly Member, if I might, is that when we talk about hate crimes versus regular crimes, they have to have an underlying hate element to it. So that often can be very hard to prove. And what we see too from a state auditor's report in 2018 is often law enforcement doesn't even identify hate crimes as involving hate. And so we have to make sure we have thorough investigations and that they identify it in all cases and then share that information with Department of Justice and with prosecutors. But it's very important to understand that not every crime is a hate crime just simply because it's perpetrated against a person of color. We do want, because there are sentencing enhancements, we want to be very careful about how those might be applied against community members, especially because we know even those laws unfortunately target communities of color more often than they do white perpetrators.
Gosh, I wish there was just a simple answer, but unfortunately, this is not. It's complicated and it's difficult, which is why I know our community appreciates this dialogue and conversation. We talked about the role that law enforcement plays, community-based organizations play, grassroots. What about corporate America? To our elected women, what do you think the role of corporate America plays? Do companies have a role? Do they have a societal obligation to play in helping to ensure that they are part of the solution in tackling the violence against members of our community?
Absolutely. It's so important for our corporate partners to understand the dynamics that we're facing and have been facing for many, many years. Right now, we see a trend towards our corporations that are investing some time and money in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that goes across the board. But besides that, what are they doing to provide protections for their employees? Is there a mechanism available for people to report and then report in a safe manner that doesn't come back as retaliation? Because that seems to be the first issue that a lot of people face is, as soon as I speak up, there's going to be retaliation towards me. So there needs to be safe spaces for individuals to speak up when it comes to wherever they're employed and being able to speak up on issues that really affect their daily lives. And so for me, just as we see us doing the work on policy, we need corporations to have similar policies that protect their employees, that take care of issues before they even happen, make sure they have preventive measures in place, and really delve into where they might come from. So where could there be opportunities of improvement? Where can you nip things in the bud before they even happen? That's a thought process that corporations need to look into.
Absolutely. I also think that, in regards to, and thank you so much, Mayor, for speaking about the internal processes that needs to happen within corporations. I also believe that corporation has a social responsibility in regards to how things pan out. I think that there needs to be representation on boards and within corporations, because when you have that kind of representation, you know that investment in community is key. It is absolutely key to invest in your community, the community that that you are in the space of, and that could look like investing dollars into, Black, Brown, API communities to make sure that our voices are heard, to make sure our rec centers are up to date so that our young people have something to do, right? And we're seeing that during COVID, we're seeing a huge disparity in regards to how, even right now, the rollout of vaccines, of who's getting vaccine and who's not, right? Even if vaccines are within our communities that are most marginalized, we're seeing that those with the most resources are lining up to get those vaccines when they're actually meant for those who are most marginalized. And so within the API community, to just speak on this hot topic, the invisibility of what that means, right? We know that our Native Hawaiians are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, yet we don't hear a lot of that being stated out in the world. And when we talk about communities that are being affected by COVID-19 and what the death rates look like. And so I think that the invisibility part of like being an API, being in the API community is a real issue, and that voice needs to be uplifted. And part of doing that for corporations and for local government and in organization is making sure that you have space and room, and you create that space for that representation, because when you have that representation, we all know that everybody has different backgrounds that they can speak on and speak to. And I think that's incredibly important for a corporation, is to create that space intentionally creating space for diversity, to make sure that there's different voices at the table when they're talking about, when they're having discussions, to ensure that, you know, API bodies are being used when they're promoting whatever it is that they're promoting. That's incredibly important. Make sure, you know, to normalize that API is beautiful, you know, and I think that that's a part of it too when we talk about corporations. But really investing in the community is key, because when we talk about, you know, a lot of the crimes that are happening, let's be clear, it's a bunch of poor people going and attacking other poor people because poor people live together, right? We don't see, you know, middle class or upper class folks coming to attack others because they have the resources they need. So we're seeing poor people attack other poor people. And that just means in this moment that it's Black people attacking Chinese Americans, or vice versa. And then there's this whole circular thing where it's really a question around, what are the resources that are there? Why are we fighting for little scraps of resources when there needs to be more investment within the community? And you know, in the city of Oakland, and I know Assemblymember Lowe, you're a huge supporter of UBI. You know, in the city of Oakland, we're looking towards how do we create some sort of UBI here, following the footsteps of what Mayor Tubbs did in Stockton, my hometown. And so I think that we have to call that out too, in regards to, you know, socioeconomic class and what that means within our communities. Because I'm Hmong American, and I can tell you that Hmong Americans, we are, you know, there's a lot of us under the poverty line. And yes, we live right next door to our Black and brown brothers, because that's where poor people live. And so we're going to come into contact with each other a lot of the times. And we're going to be fighting against each other for these scraps, when really in reality, you know, we need more investments within our community, and we need investments in our youth, in our young people, so they have things to do. They have enrichment programs that they can participate in. And I think we need to do better in our schools. I tell you, I went through public school in Stockton, and never did I ever learn about American cultures and the various cultures in the United States, and what the history looked like. And I feel like that needs to happen at an early level, over and over, in multiple different grade levels, because if we understand our shared struggles, because we have shared struggles all across the board, no matter your ethnic background, we can understand each other a little bit more. And from that understanding, we can build stronger relationships. And so I think that that's a downfall that we have here, you know, in the whole United States of America, because quite honestly, I didn't get my American cultures education until I was in college. And we all know college is a privilege, right? A lot of people are not going to go to college because they have to provide for their family and get right into the workforce. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that we can do in regards to long term. There's a lot of things that we can do in regards to our short term. Everybody has a social responsibility to participate, including corporations, local government, community organizations, and what have you, because we need to make sure that those voices that are usually unheard, and those who are voiceless, that their voices are heard as well and brought to the table.
I appreciate that passion very much, and it's evident in your advocacy. You know, as we finalize and close, I want to ask each of you to just summarize in one word, what's the best word to describe your current feeling and sentiment in this current climate right now? And as you think about that, I want to thank Annie Lam and Mona and all of the hard work for staff and volunteers to put this together with the Caucus Toot partnership. That work, the work that you continue to do, is so important for our community, and you can see it in the people. But we're all in this together. We're all going to do our part, not just on the elected side, on the advocacy side, on the corporate side, on the community side. Let's make sure that we bring a friend, that we check in on each other, and do wellness checks. How are you doing? And just making sure that we connect with folks, especially right now during COVID pandemic, where it's that much harder to connect on the basic humanity, the level of humanity, that's much more difficult. So check in on one another, and thank you to the Caucus Institute. So let's begin then, and that one word that will summarize your sentiment right now. Councilwoman Thao.
Solidarity. And thank you so much, Mona and Annie, and thank you so much, Assemblymember Lowe, for having me.
Thank you. Mayor Khan.
You know, Sheng just took the words right out of my mouth. Solidarity, collaboration, I think is very important. And again, thank you all. It's been a pleasure being here with you.
Xiaoxian Liu.
Unity and action. And then may I please share an action step you all can take, bit.ly/National Asian Petition. If folks want to sign up, we'll be sharing more information on how you can support local efforts in Georgia as well. So bit.ly/National Asian Petition.
Thank you. And last but not least, Manju.
I would say community strength. I know it's 2 words, but I think that's what's really going to help us overcome really what's going on now, which is such a tragedy. And I want to express my gratitude to you, Assembly Member, as well as Mona and Annie for putting together this amazing event.
Thank you very much. All right, sister, back to you, Mona. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember. Thank you so much. To our panelists, our superstar panelists, thank you for what you're doing. And I just want to say, everyone who participated, think about this. Speak up, speak out, and do it together. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.